I'm just going to do a brief introduction, and our agenda's there on the screen. So I want to thank you for being here, and thank those who are watching online. So Maurice and I, we welcome applause or booing at the appropriate moments. The rest of the time, though, if you can stay in whisper mode, because we do have an online audience, and we don't want them to miss out on the discussion. A special shout out to the Housing Task Force Facebook group. We know you're watching, and we really appreciate the effort that Community Living Ontario has made to include everyone in this session by making it available online. If you want to make sure you're in the right place, because it's not too late to bail, this session is about Just Enough Support, which is about finding the right mix of natural supports, technology, and paid resources for supporting an optimal quality of life. The approach is not specific to housing, but Maurice will be focusing mainly on housing, and I'll be addressing Just Enough Support as a broader quality of life opportunity. In the session description we wrote months ago, you'll note it talks about a panel that includes people with intellectual disabilities and their family members. You will indeed hear from them, but by way of launch of a brand new video series where they are good enough to put many hours into the filming. Anyone that's made a video, you know the scheduling and setup and filming, it takes a lot of patience. So in lieu of their attendance today, you will see them in the videos, and some of them are also watching online with us, so if you like what you see with the videos, let them know with an enthusiastic response. We also have with us two representatives from LiveWorkPlay who are available to assist with your questions. On the end over there, we have Chris Floyd, who you'll see in the video, and he's also on the front lines as a community connector and life coach. And we're also joined by Julie Kingston, who, among other things, is our lead for orienting training and staff with respect to our use of the Just Enough Support approach. And we have Kim from Southeast Grade, and she is elected to sit there and not there. But the main point, not the main point, it's great to have her here because she has been with the organization through all of the many important changes that Maurice will be talking about. I won't get into a lengthy introduction of Maurice, but I wanted to quickly explain why we are sharing this presentation. Aside from the obvious that they have a culture of excellence, which you'll hear about, one of the main reasons is that they do their work in what is mainly a series of rural communities, whereas at LiveWorkPlay we are mostly involved with urban areas of Ottawa. So Just Enough Support can be practiced anywhere with anyone. And so although you may see two gray-haired dudes and say that's not very diverse, we thought the most important diversity, aside from our height differential, was that one of us is from a rural community and one from very urban. So we're also part of a wider collaborative called From Presence to Citizenship. And many of you have attended our annual learning exchange events in February. Our fearless leader, Jim, is right over there. I don't know what color shirt that is, but it's an orangish red. And I mention that because you may not know that that entire partnership came out of an informal discussion held pretty close to this very location about 4 years ago. And so in that spirit of learning and collaboration, let's get into it and help me welcome Maurice Voisin to the podium. Thank you. You'll just tell me every time?
Sure. Yep. Thanks, Keenan. Good afternoon. I'm pleased to be joined by Keenan in this presentation. Like you said, we've been involved with the From Presence to Citizenship and share many of the same values of nurturing independence in the community. So I'll go through our monitoring model that was developed over 25 years ago as an alternative to some of the 24-hour staffed locations that were pretty popular in the early 1990s. And we believe if some of these individuals that we're supporting today were with another organization, they would probably be in 24-hour staffed congregate settings. So it's not necessarily the needs of the individual, it's more the model that supports the person or wraps around the individual. So next. So this is our mission statement, and just on the left-hand side, the bullet points there, we support individualized services. We try to recognize abilities rather than deficits. We're certainly strong with independent living, community involvement, and accessibility. Kind of our tagline is being creative, embracing change, valuing diversity and inclusion. The gentleman on the right-hand side there passed away a few years ago, but he came from Oxford Regional Centre. And one of the things that we put that on our annual report a couple of years ago, is there a risk with a person with a disability driving a lawn tractor? Sure, but if you look at the expression on his face, I think it's priceless. So we do value dignity of risk, and you know, It's something that doesn't necessarily always just apply to individuals we support. I think it's the same thing if we're launching our children to go to college or university, or their first apartment, their first job, taking their driver's test, all those kind of things is a dignity of risk. Next, please. This is just our timeline. So like most community livings, we were organized by a group of really committed families and individuals, community members that wanted to make things better for their children. Kind of started off with schooling as the first priority, and then joined Community Living Ontario in the mid-60s as a provincial organization. Purchased a community center in the mid-70s, set up their first supervised group home. They also had an ARC Industries. And then in the mid-1980s, the association reevaluated their services and brought some of the leading thinkers in Ontario in to review the organization. Basically, the short answer to that was, you've got a good little organization here, but you need to move to individualized supports. In 1991, when the NDP was in power in Ontario, they encouraged agencies to purchase nonprofit homes. So we have 4 of our homes under the Southeast Grey nonprofit homes. And then in 1992, we started our first agency-owned monitoring home as an alternative to people coming from facilities. In 1993, we closed the ARC Industries. At one time, we had 3 vans coming from different communities, going into one location, and we refocused that and supported people in their own communities where they're running into their neighbors at the grocery store, the post office, the community center, the church, any community activity like that. In 1995, we were honored to be recognized with the James Montgomery Community Award. And in 2014, we had Doug Carton and his partner Sandy come in and do a review of our transportation system. So we had a Monday to Friday, early morning run, afternoon run. And Doug and Sandy very skillfully said, you've got an individualized support, but you've got a segregated transportation system. So we disbanded that, made agency vehicles available for people, used taxis and other services, volunteer drivers, and now it's a 24/7 rather than having people slotted into, well, you have to go Friday morning at 9, even though your appointment's not till 11, because we don't have any transportation that's geared to you. So. This is a place where Cheryl lives, and Cheryl lived at Huronia Regional Center for a number of years, has a number of medical issues and some self-injurious behavior. She has some limited verbal communication. She lives on the main floor where the picture window on the right-hand side is, and her monitor lives in the lower level. Her monitoring family is a single female. So, this is probably one of the more complex people that we support. So, this is in a small community. So the individual that lives towards at the back of the house is a male. He's the only person we receive intervenor funding for from the ministry. So it's funding for individuals with deaf blindness. So he is 39 years of age. He's deaf blind. He has cerebral palsy. He has some seizures. He has very limited mobility. So we put a ceiling support and a tracking system in, and needs support for bathing, using the toilet, and getting in and out of bed. So I think it just kind of illustrates that someone with complex needs can still be supported without having the 24-hour staffing. On the back, on the right-hand side over here, there's a white kind of almost like a granny flat apartment, and that's where Kelly lives. And Kelly was someone that had involvement with CAS. Her mom was supported by a local community living, and she has a dual diagnosis. There's been some aggression in her past. She has a high food drive, and now she is an insulin-dependent diabetic. So she lives on the back part in a granny flat, her own apartment. The monitors go in that door just to the left of the car, and then they have 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, a dining room, and a kitchen upstairs. So, and next. This is an individual that we just started supporting. She's a young lady that's 27. She was living at home with her mom, but due to some aggression, she was not able to continue. She has a dual diagnosis, and she has some obsessive compulsive tendencies. Her monitoring family is husband and wife with 2 young children, so lots of interaction there in the yard, and sharing the yard there in the property. This is one of the more complex individuals that we support. He's 60. He experiences autism. Has had previous aggression. He's got some sensory processing sensitivities. He was involved with 2 other agencies prior to coming to a hospitalization. 2 psychiatric hospitals, was admitted to Midwestern Regional Center outside of Palmerston in the late 1980s, and then as part of the facility depopulation, came to Southeast Grey during the facility closure prior to Midwestern being closed in 1998. His parents were very involved in choosing colors and fabrics and personalizing his home. He's a gentleman that doesn't like wearing socks, so we put a heated floor in. He's a gentleman that would rather stand up to go to the washroom, so we put a urinal in. So just some practical things that you can do to make things conducive. And he didn't really play well with others, so he prefers to be on his own, and so he lives on his own. In the main level of the house, the monitor is a couple with a young son. This is a home that was built for a gentleman that came from Rideau Regional Center. Unfortunately, prior to his arrival, he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. So the family still decided to go ahead. He ended up just living with us for about 5 weeks. We hired a couple of nurses because of the terminal nature of his illness. But then we were able to use the home for 2 other individuals. So the gentleman lives on the right-hand side. So the door has a double entrance. When he came from the facility, he was an eloper. That was the description they used. So this is a double entrance at the front. To the right-hand side is a gentleman that is 50, and he has fetal alcohol syndrome, has some limited communication, had CAS involvement from a child, some aggression and hospitalization. The lady that lives on the lower level has a borderline personality disorder, has a syndrome called Cornelia de Lange syndrome with limited communication, and she lived with the family in foster care until she came to live with us. Monitoring family is a middle-aged couple with no children at home. This is the only individual that we provide support to that we get LIN funding, so he came from a psychiatric facility. He's just on pension now, so he just turned 66. He was transferred from a dual diagnosis unit. He had some history of behavioral issues in the nursing home, and he would borrow materials from other people in the residence, and kind of drove some of the staff a little bit crazy. He never would deny that he took something, but when his pockets were bulging with toys and staplers and things, it was pretty obvious he had something in there that wasn't his. The monitoring family is a couple with grown children not residing in their home. This is an individual that was transferred from another community living where he had times at 2-to-1 staffing inside a 4-person residence. He now has, his parents asked or advocated with the ministry to have him relocated, and we staffed it for 24 hours a day for 1 year. We kind of predicted maybe 3 to 4 months, and we misjudged on that, but those are just kind of those trial and success things that we experienced. And then he moved in, and then his monitor moved into the lower level. But from a person that went from having 2-to-1 staffing inside a congregate setting to living now on his own, the agency that provided support to him previously came to visit him, and we don't usually tour his home, but we asked for special permission, and he was happy to see his previous staff. And the temptation was to have him clean up his house, but we didn't want to do that. We wanted to make it see as natural as possible. So you can't put a thing on his dining room table because he has books and crafts and bird feed supplies or whatever, but we have to remember it's his house. So that's the most important thing. So he's been a real success, and his monitoring family is a single retired lady. This is an individual that came from the behavior treatment unit at Midwestern Regional Center. He had an unsuccessful group home placement with another agency, a fair bit of aggression and some flight risk, has a dual diagnosis, has some real strong cultural and familial contacts. Danger didn't seem to be a part of his vocabulary, so we had to really kind of watch about that with some of the boundary issues. And he has been with us now for 15 years, and just recently went to a monitoring model. Before that, there was staff in another location that monitored him. So this is kind of just an overview, and if anybody, and we're going through this fairly quickly to allow some discussion, but if you want, certainly contact me, or you can see this on the webcast. But we have 4 locations where 2 individuals are supported. We have 12 locations where 1 individual is supported, and 1 location where there's 24-hour staffing that will eventually, we don't know when that is, will move to monitoring. And then we have 4 supported individuals that live in agency-owned homes, but they don't need a monitor. So that's that. As a general guideline, the monitoring is from 8 in the evening till 8 in the morning. Monitors don't receive a monetary amount. They get rent in exchange for the overnight support. We use the family home guidelines of 2 days a month, like 24 days a year for respite. And we ask the monitors to kind of choose the person that would be providing support, as long as they have a vulnerable sector screen and first aid training and whatever else we need for quality assurance. I just talked about that, respite. I guess one advantage of a monitoring family, and this is something we learned when agencies tour our agency, when they say, you know, if you're in a home where there's overnight staff or sleep staff, you could have up to 14 different people over the course of a 2-week period, more likely 5 to 7 or something like that. But with a monitor, you always have the same family. We know how important relationships are to all of us. And I think the monitoring family is allowed to do that because you share the property, the driveway, the garage, whatever else is on the property. That's just kind of that. The monitoring model isn't a be-all and end-all. Not everybody is suited to the monitoring model. So we have 28 people living with families, 19 in our monitoring model. SIL is 14. We have 8 people in non-monitored locations in the agency. Associate families, so individuals living with other families, not their own, 2. 1 in long-term care, 1 with family home. 1 we still have 24-hour staffed, and 4 is kind of other, so domiciliary hostels or whatever. Yes?
I just wondered if you could talk a little slower like that last
Sure.
time.
Yeah, it's just a highlight. Yeah, it's just a highlight of what the monitoring model is there. Okay, do you want me to go back? Sure. So they're just bullet points. So just the matching process is really important. Each monitoring agreement is unique and could be tailored. I read out the 3rd bullet. Monitors are required to go through appropriate training. As a general guideline, monitoring is 8 in the evening till 8 in the morning. The monitoring agreement, so it started off as kind of a 1 or 2 page agreement. Then we had some legal advice, and it changed to about a 10-page monitoring agreement. The agency owns all the homes, but we know it can work with rental or unique arrangements. If a family approached you and said, my aunt lived with us or my mother-in-law lived with us and we have a granny flat, we could definitely make that work. If as long as you just have an understanding of who's paying the expenses. If the roof needs to be repaired, is that a you piece or is that an agency piece?
So my apologies also, because the whole presentation is available. And at the very last slide, I'll put up the links and leave them there for a long time. So all I have to do is write down the address. So don't feel that you have to
copy everything down.
Record all the slides.
Yeah.
And if you can't find it, we will email it to you, the whole thing.
Jim?
One thing that flashed over quickly, I'm not sure what I saw, how important is matching or relationships?
Super, if a person doesn't, so say you have a person that experiences autism and they're very sensitive to noise. We have some wonderful families that have young children, but that's just not a match. It's a non-starter. So you really have to match up that person to what their needs are. And if you have somebody that, again, if you have somebody that's sensitive to noise or whatever, you may want to ask them in the monitoring interview, do you play the drums or the saxophone or the bagpipes or whatever, because that's going to be a non-starter. So yeah, very important, Jim. Thanks. Dean? Yep.
Did you say that you own all the homes?
We own all the homes, but we know it can work with a rental as long as you have some kind of prior agreement, like I said, to say if there's need to replace drywall or plumbing or a specialized bathtub. Or big thing is accessibility. Do you need to put a separate entrance in? So.
Easier for recruitment.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Sure.
Maurice,
Yes.
could you explain the difference between the family homes, the associate family,
Yep.
and this supervised, what we're talking about?
Yeah, so I'm going to review the monitoring model. So family home is a government program. So in our area, it's run by Family Services Perth Huron out of Stratford. So they would have a number of homes with a maximum of 2 people in the homes. We just provide kind of the day supports for that. Associate family is a ministry funding description, a detail code that the ministry has. So that would be someone living with someone other than their own family. So there would be somebody that would go through the screening, and then when we have compliance review, they would need to see an associate family agreement, how we chose the person, the matching. There has to be supervised visits every 60 days, 2 visits that are unannounced a year. So there's a whole bunch of criteria that the ministry has if your agency receives that funding under that detail code. Yep.
And the monitoring, you guys choose the family?
We choose the family, yep. Yep, yeah. So.
And what is the incentive for someone to monitor?
I guess the relationship, not having to pay rent. We've had a couple of situations where it's been a single family and they have 2 children. And if most of your money goes to rent, then how do you provide and pay for sports or education and do savings? A couple families have used the monitoring model when they first are a young couple and maybe they want to save for a home, and so if they're not paying rent. Sometimes the incentive for a young couple to have a second income is to pay the mortgage or the rent. This way it might allow a young family to stay at home with younger children. For a retired couple, they don't need the space, and we look after all the maintenance, snow shoveling, lawn mowing, all those kind of things. And it's not a taxable benefit. So, yeah, Eugene?
What's your average tenure then of a relationship in the monitoring?
The shortest has been a year. Longest has been 20 years. So anything in between. I think on average, I would say 10. Probably most of our families would stay around 10 years. So, yeah. Yes?
Most of them seem to have aggression or
Yes.
higher needs.
Yeah.
What about your higher functioning families? Are they independent? You're supporting independent living, or where are they?
Yep. There's like 14 people that would be living in their own apartments, so supported independent living. And 28 would live with their family. That could be mom and dad, or that could be a brother, sister, an aunt,
But if
something like
they
that.
want to move out of family,
Yep.
the monitor could be an option for them.
Well, now it sort of depends on the DSO. I mean, they'd have to kind of wait for a vacancy, and their needs would have to kind of be at the top of that to.
So they have to be a high need.
Well, not necessarily. It depends, I guess, who's most in need and what their family situation is. You know, if they were living with elderly parents and parents ended up going to long-term care, that person kind of rises to the top. I think.
Saying that they have to be in some sort of crisis.
Not necessarily. I think just there has to be definitely a need there. It could be the behavior. Maybe they ended up in the hospital with some medical issues or whatever. Or maybe they came from a group living situation where there wasn't a good match with the other individuals they were staying with. So.
So if they didn't want to live with family, but they needed more support than supporting independent living, where would they fall?
I guess it would depend on where there is a vacancy and how creative we could be as an agency to meet their needs. So I think one of the points of just kind of reviewing the individuals and some of their characteristics, and I don't mean to paint them in a negative picture, that they have been successful despite higher needs. Sometimes the assumption is when people come and say, you know, how many group homes do you have? And we say, well, we have none. And they say, well, then you don't support anybody with high needs. And that's kind of the myth that we're trying to dispel with this right enough support. We also purchased a 5-plex, and so we have 1 individual supported there and 4 people from the community. So it's kind of maybe reverse integration or whatever you want to call it. But Ted, who lives there, is in the late 60s, and his other tenants accept him. We could fill that with 5 people with the waiting list or whatever, but then it would become a seg-zoned home, and there'd be 5 people with disabilities that just would have their own apartments. Now, like, he gets kind of spoiled there. He gets pie and chicken dinners and everything delivered to him. And it's really, it's kind of neat. It's got an informal system. If the other residents that live there don't see him out, they'll phone the office and say, is Ted away? Like, or whatever. Like, it's that kind of thing. You can't get paid support. A few months ago, Ted was at the Legion with one of his staff. The staff had to leave. One of his neighbors was there, and so Rick, who was supporting Ted, said, Rick, I have to get up early in the morning. Let's go home. And one of his other people there, Wayne, was there and said, well, Ted, I'll buy you a beer and take you home later. Guess what Ted chose, you know? So he didn't need staff, and you can't advertise for that in the paper. So just really briefly, again, just wanted to try to give you an idea. We took 12 locations that we have to see what the supports were, and those hours of support a week are listed in the 3rd column there. And just a rough figure, these figures are about 3 years old, so it'll be a little higher now, but around $100,000 for each location as far as the support dollars. And next. And then we also went into a number of locations, again 12, and tried to capture the utilities, insurance, repairs, and maintenance. And again, to operate a monitoring home is around $20,000 a year. Next. And then this is just a ministry document that we got from our finance person. And it just shows you that these figures are 2014 from June. And it shows that the average person in the supported group living residence, the cost was $106,246. Yeah, Eugene?
Shirley has
Oh, sure.
How can my sister get help for me when I go to her place? I can't walk upstairs.
So accessibility, Shirley, or?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I guess, you know, that's kind of a tough one. Maybe there could be something creative with your agency in St. Mary's that they could help you meet at a place that is accessible, a restaurant, the library, community center.
My sister wants to make the house
Accessible, yeah. No, it's a huge thing, and I think anything that we buy as an agency, I think accessibility is something we do probably as step one. Whether it's a current need or whether it's a future need. So that's a good point, Shirley. Yeah. Yep, Jeff?
Yeah, can you repeat the question?
Oh, sorry. Shirley had asked the question about how can her sister meet with her because her home isn't accessible. And it just suggested that maybe with the agency that they could be creative, meet at a community spot that is already accessible or something like that. So, Dean?
These homes that you own, are they owned by the agency or?
But by the association, although the MCSS or MCCS has some interest in them as well. So, yes?
Your fiveplex that you showed
Yep.
earlier, was that built by your agency or was that already existing in the community?
No, it was, we actually had some lots and we were going to build a triplex and then this came on the market. So, the question was it built for our agency or was it purchased? So we had 3 lots and we were going to build a triplex and then this came on the market. It already had 5 tenants in it. Then when the first vacancy happened, we looked at who needed supports and a place to live and that's what we did. Purchased it, yeah. And then the rents kind of carry the mortgage. Yeah, sure. So then the previous one was 106. This is intensive support where we think a lot of the people we support belong. And if you're looking at the cost from 2014, the average cost for an intensive support residence was $167,000. So that's more appropriate. And that's yours.
Okay.
Thank you.
Whoops. We were worried no one was going to ask any questions, so we've already solved it without even getting to the question portion. So I'm actually quite excited about this. I need this. So I'm not going to talk too much at all about our organization, LiveWorkPlay, but I think it is important to note that although we come from Ottawa, which is a big city, we are a very small organization, and we have less than 25 full-time staff. So if you're watching my presentation, you're thinking, easy for you, big city slickers, just keep in mind that actually both of our organizations are very small if we put them on the scale of all the TPAs in Ontario. We're definitely on the short end of the curve. But you know, it's really about the grassroots efforts to connect with community. And so even though we're small in some sense, it's the partnering with families, the reaching out to our local communities to facilitate positive change and inclusion that's really making things possible. So I will have 4 short videos to show you, and they're from a 6-part video series. And so the 2 videos we aren't showing today is the introduction, which you don't need because I'm doing it now, and the other is a 20-minute sort of interview-style video, which really gets into the nuts and bolts of the Just Enough support approach, the science of it, because there is good support from, for example, the neuroleadership Leadership Institute, yes, who are really looking at what is diversity inclusion all about, and the science of that really supports the approach that we're taking. So you can get really into that if you are into that sort of thing in that interview video, which is available online as of today. And it's also about how the approach works in practice. So we're going to show you some stories of people's lives, but if you're wondering how did this all happen, it really digs into that. And as I said, the entire video series is available from YouTube. No one's seen it yet. You're going to be the first, and then it's going to go live online. And I'll be putting up the address for all of that at the end and leaving it on the screen so you can take that with you. What I also want to make clear, we did not invent this approach or even what it's called. We first heard the phrase just enough support from the paper Altogether Now, which involved a wide community of person-centered thinkers. It's an approach that Helen Sanderson and Associates has shared. And we put our own spin on it, informed in part from our experiences in refining the approach through our Housing Task Force project. And this was a partnership that included the Multi-Faith Housing Initiative up there in the middle. They were building a new nonprofit housing community in the southern area of Ottawa called The Haven in Barrhaven. We'll go to the next slide. Yep. And in the video, when you meet Ali and Heather, they live at The Haven. But I just want to make sure it's understood that's a housing community for all people, not people with disabilities. There are more than 200 people that live there. And as far as we know, about 8 of them have intellectual disabilities. So it's kind of just an ordinary ratio like you'd find in any community. And I make this point because although I do mention it in the video, it bears repeating again, it's for anyone, anywhere. Okay. Let's see if we can play this.
Phil has a joy for life. He's a very happy person. He's very caring. He's a lot of fun. He likes to play little jokes on me. The first time I see him, every time, if he's outside, he gets very excited, always waving or yelling from a distance. Yep.
The principles of Just Enough Support, one of the keys is that it's person-centered. And what we do is we look at the natural relationships in their life, technology that could help them get where they need to go, and also the paid supports that would be helpful to them at this time. And also knowing they'll grow and change. And so that the supports we set up around them are always just for now and always just enough. So not interfering in their life, supporting their life.
Phil has his own apartment. He lives on his own. He's been there for quite a while now. Cooks, cleans, he takes care of himself.
He's proven himself over the last few years to be very independent, more than I would have ever dreamed of. We've been very fortunate with Phil and the LiveWorkPlay team that have helped him along the way and helped us as a family along the way.
What we found over time, when people have had the benefit of this approach, as they take on more roles, do more for themselves, get more connected in their community, grow their relationships, their self-esteem increases, and miraculously, suddenly they can do something where the file says that they couldn't.
And it's amazing, who would have ever thought that Phil would be using social media, using a computer, using a telephone. His workers and his support system has been able to educate him in these regards and again adding to his life and the success of his well-being.
I hope that he stays on his own, stays in the city, so we can keep hanging out.
See, I do see that.
Yeah.
I agree.
Jalen's very upbeat. She always uplifts my mood whenever I come see her. She's my workout buddy. We've been working out for a year and a half.
Tim likes to do his own thing. He likes to have control over his own apartment, his own meals, his budget, all that stuff he takes care of. I just kind of am along for the ride.
Yeah.
I think one of the neat things about Just Enough Support is identified through research that over-supporting people can be just as harmful as under-supporting people. And the reason is it limits their life opportunities. So if people are doing everything for them, they are becoming dependent, and then over time will lose the ability to acquire those skills or opportunities for themselves. So we have to be really careful of that, because it actually puts people at risk. The more they're dependent on others, especially on paid support, the less safe they are, because they have less relationships in their life.
I got involved with LiveWorkPlay over a year and a half ago, so I wanted to meet up with people with intellectual disabilities, kind of learn about their life and the challenges that they face. I like both the one-on-one and the relationship that we've built.
So my role with Tim is to help get him connected to different people and different functions in the community that might be useful for Tim, like getting his hair done and getting his nails done on weekends. When we go grocery shopping, we'll usually go to the same cashier, and they get to know Tim by name. Adds that extra person that kind of in the community can see him and knows who he is.
Yeah, because the person who did it when I was giving my milk, she knew my name. She said, "Hi, Tim."
I think we always want to look at paid support as something for now, and are there parts of that role that could shift over time. But sometimes it's part of someone's routine and it's very important to them, and it's not a role that would be suited for natural support. And for those who always need some paid support, that's fine, but I think we've also had the experience of needing us less and needing us differently. This is all about not turning a person's life into a bureaucracy. That helps nobody. This is a human being, and the real measurement is, are they enjoying life to the greatest extent possible?
I love that he's back to me. It's so much fun. Because after I've spent a day at work around people, and then I just want to come home.
She always has a smile on her face, and then that brings a smile on mine.
I like living on my own. I like being more independent.
Allie's our lovely daughter, and she's got a great sense of humor. She's also very independent. You love your friends, and you're a hard worker, and you smile a lot.
Two things about Just Enough Support that I often hear. So people think that it's associated with a physical location, and they think it's associated with a certain type of person. And it's neither. It's for anywhere, and it's for anybody. Everyone's looking to connect, and so it's just finding those commonalities and helping everyone be a part of the same welcoming community.
Really, a welcoming community is exactly what it sounds like. It's one where everyone is welcome, everyone's made to feel a part of the community, and not in an exception sort of way, but really just as part of the community in an equal sort of way. We don't practice tolerance, we practice inclusion.
One of our really most impressive partnerships is with the Multi-Faith Housing Initiative and the Haven in Barhaven. So that was a nonprofit housing community that they built, and we had approached them because we saw that their community was really about diversity and inclusion, and we said, have you thought about people with intellectual disabilities as part of that plan? And they were all for it.
LiveWorkPlay has been absolutely fantastic in communicating with us and us with them to make this be something that we can be proud of and that we can talk about and tell people about, so that other communities are encouraged to do what we're doing here.
Just Enough Support is all about being community focused, and so we're looking at what are opportunities for the person in authentic environments with other people. Part of that is, where are communities within the community where people can belong and meet new people and then grow their relationships and also grow their quality of life.
I have friends here.
To have friends in a social network, that's big.
Independent means you live on your own. I feel happy and yeah.
I'm Heather McAdam. I have a disability called fetal dilatant syndrome.
Heather is amazing. We're so happy because, you know, she got a job, she's working with great people. LiveWorkPlay has been so supportive, giving her so many opportunities to grow, and they celebrate small things like busing and things like that you would think that's just a regular thing, but it's a huge milestone.
The real outcome we're looking for is a self-managed life for the person and really barrier reduction. So what's in the way of the vision they have for their own life, but also offering discovery. So none of us knows at age 20 or 25 or 30 or 35, what do we really want 5, 10, 15 years from now? They're all just guesses. And so we have to leave the door open.
I have 2 part-time jobs. I work at the Westin, 2 days in the afternoon, and again, 2 days in the afternoon for the government. On Friday nights, I sometimes hang out with some friends, kind of thing.
Heather's been making her own appointments. If she has a question, she knows who to ask. Mm-hmm. And that's a big thing, is knowing how to self-advocate, to be able to know how to pick up the phone and not be afraid to talk to people.
Technology is often overlooked, so it's a fabulous way of solving problems and reducing barriers. And we used to often solve these problems with staff, or even an entire housing arrangement that's built around the fact that maybe the person has trouble keeping track of keys, or maybe shutting off the stove is something people will be concerned about. In 2018, there are coded locks, there's fingerprint locks, there's automatic shut-off valves for stoves, there's electricity that can be shut off remotely. There's all sorts of options, and we sometimes ignore those. And this is very dangerous because we can actually label a person as unable to do certain things, including have their own apartment.
I think the life that Heather has built for herself here is something that's sustainable. Knowing that if something were to happen to me, that Heather is still on the right course. She still has the support. She is fairly confident that she can continue living the way she is. So that's a big step, to be able to have that peace going forward.
I mean, I just see this as a life-changing opportunity for people. So to see the light in those people's eyes, and then to see how their family feels when they see that person having the success and reflecting that back, it just changes people, it changes families, it changes communities when excluded people become included contributors. I was stunned silence, but yeah. Jim.
At the beginning, you made reference to something, but I know while you're the PR in the place, the workplace, Julie does much. The success should be attributed to her, no large part. I'd like to ask Julie.
Turn that on.
Keenan made reference to the Helen Sanders.
Sorry?
Keenan made
Yeah.
reference to the Helen Sanders group for this. Could you explain how that came about and the role they played, please?
Repeat the question.
Can you repeat the question?
Absolutely. So Jim was asking about the original inspiration for understanding or exploring more the concept of just enough support, which was originally a concept that we learned about when we were introduced to Helen Sanders and Associates, or HSA, and they're a group primarily who started in the UK, and many of you in this room are probably aware that Julie Millette here in Canada has been working for the last few years at HSA Canada and Associates. So it's the operationalization of person-centered approach and orientation, both within how we orient our services and supports to people, but also as organizations. So having person-centered organizations is something that we were really interested in, not just orienting our organization to start with the person in terms of supports. That's very important. But I think what has allowed us to really continue developing our ability to provide more person-centered supports is that as an organization, we've really adopted that throughout the layers of the organization and through our policies and our processes from the board level all the way throughout staff and volunteers, and how we actually support community partners. So is that anything else that you wanted to chat? Yeah, okay.
Great. Yes?
I was wondering how much time you spend exploring the person's individual gifts that they bring themselves.
Chris, want to try speaking to that, or Julie?
Yeah, I think that's really around.
Can you repeat the question?
The question is, how much time do you spend exploring the person's gifts? And I think that's really at the heart of everything that we do, is really getting to know the person, who they are, what's important to them, and more importantly, obviously discovering what their gifts are from them, but also helping the community see the gifts that they have to offer in action in the community. I think that piece sometimes gets lost a bit, that with our staff team, trying to orient ourselves to, yes, it could be on the ministry paper that we're supporting this person to manage their household and buy groceries and cook their meals, but really it's reorienting ourselves to, that might be a means to an end, but really it's around how can we help the community value and see the contribution of the person's gifts in action. And I think that's something that it never stops. It's not that it's once you get to know the person's gifts, that part's done. It's a process that's just continues forever, because those things can change, evolve. So I think that's really the primary purpose in the work that we all do, is really uncovering and highlighting those gifts to everybody.
Yeah, I was going to say, on Chris's behalf, his answer would be all of the time. I mean, that's all you're doing. And you'll see Chris with Phil, who's, for lack of sorry to use a label, but just non-standard communicator. When we were first introduced to Phil, it was like hours of what he can't do. And we just waited and waited. His mother was crying, and because we had just met her, and we waited and waited and waited. And I was like, well, tell me what he can do. And she was like, no one's ever asked me that. And that was like really the start of our relationship, and just getting to know Phil. And we just had a community event with about 150 people the other night, and I was at a table with people who don't know Phil very well, and he came over to see me. And I could see that thing going on where they're not really sure that the person's making any sense. And so I'm just like, hey, Phil, do you mind if I introduce you? And so I'm explaining, yeah, so Phil likes to communicate a lot based on movies that he's seen. And so when he came over and he was doing that, well, that's Superman. And so sometimes when he's feeling good about me, he refers to me in that way. Sometimes it's less complimentary, but like it all has a meaning, and it's really challenging if you haven't seen a lot of movies. But everything he's saying means something, and he's been communicating a lot, and the fact that he's here, chosen to come to this table, means something. And so it's a lot of that, and I know that with Chris's work with Phil out in the community, helping other people, whether it's cashiers, neighbors, whatever, who have not quite figured out Phil, but an awful lot of people have. He's a super popular guy. And one of the issues with Phil in the beginning with his family was just, of course, safety. In many ways, he is one of the safest people, because he has 1,000 friends who would just burn down your house if you messed with Phil. I mean, he has so many valued friends, and that neighborhood just knows him so well. So anyway, I got off on a tangent. Are any more questions for anybody? Sorry, at the back.
I had a question regarding the technology. So, do you guys weigh the pros and cons with each thing for the technology to the people that you're supporting for how it will help them?
Right. So the technology all comes from an identified, often maybe even before they have taken that step of moving from, whether it's living with their family or another situation. Really, it comes out of sort of barrier type discussions, as well as things the person wants to do, but also what are things in the way. So some of the ones I mentioned, very common, the whole issue around keys and locks. There was a time, right, if the idea was, they can't use keys, so they can't have their own place. So that's, those are things that are easily solved. A really cool one was, well, I think it is, and if you saw Yona's talk yesterday, so about toileting. So it was someone that just had a challenge with flushing. But this is a huge barrier. If you don't, in some period of time, this becomes a huge problem that can involve plumbers and landlords getting very upset and all this kind of stuff. So I think it was Julie found it. It was like $40, an auto flusher, just like they have in hotels, but for a home toilet. And solved this problem that was occupying, you know, there was big meetings and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, we got to do stickers. And oh, no stickers. Please. Please, psychiatrists, psychologists, stop with the stickers. They're adults, it's not kindergarten. So anyway, this has solved the problem in a way that makes the most sense, because obviously the person, you know, they're like 30 and it's not about stickers and things. It's just an issue, and we need to, like, this is part of who the person is, and stop worrying about that and let's fix it. So, yes?
One other follow-up. In the video, one of the segments that showed about talking about the fact that if you say forget about shutting the stove off or something, how would that work with the technology, so like for a reminder or something?
Cool. So there is smart home. Sorry, the question is about technologies and how something like you know, shut-off valves for stoves or electricity works. And those are just, the generic term is just smart home technology. It's gotten to the point now where this is stuff you can buy at Home Depot. And it's just using apps like anything else that connects to a device somewhere else. So whether it's an agency, a family, or both, you can set up any device that uses electricity so that a signal is sent, you know, a message is sent. It could be a text, any number of things that says, you know, this device is in use, or it can send a warning, or it can shut itself off. And this is only going to get better and better. And it's such a fantastic development for people who, you know, we talk about how, you know, staff used to be in people's face just for things like that. You know, you're there for 3 hours, but really it's for 5 minutes to make sure that someone turns off a stove or something like that. And so the ability to get out of people's face, or even just like with Phil talking with his mom on Skype, you know, we use Skype or texting, depending what the person wants, and that's part of your question. Whatever the person prefers. Some really like text, some it needs to be video, some like the old school phone calls. So
there's also companies available that make like safety burners, so they're stoves that don't allow, you could put a piece of paper on the burner and turn it on and it wouldn't start. It has to, a pot has to make connection with the burner in order for it to turn on, if that's the biggest concern for safety. And then we also have voice monitors in some locations where, so the individual I described before that has deaf blindness, he sleeps in a hospital bed, but there's a voice monitor there that the last thing the staff do when they leave at 9 p.m. at night is plug that monitor in, and the receiver is in the monitor's family's location. So if something would happen, the smoke detector would go off, you know, someone, you know, there would be a noise, or the individual would call out if he was hurt, then the monitoring family can respond within minutes, almost about the same reaction time as a staff that would be sleeping or that would be available in the next room.
Julie, you had a point?
I was just gonna, just the other thing around technology. I know sometimes we get focused that technology can replace a staff member, and in many cases, it's certainly, if that's the preference, then it certainly can. But I think another point of view is that sometimes technology can just open up time for staff to focus on other things with the person, focusing on maybe helping them get their social network more robust, or other things that are maybe a higher priority for the person. So it's not always, it can be a replacement, but it can also just enhance and open up other opportunities for helping in other areas.
Good point. Yes? Absolutely. So assets-based solutions is, like I said, so we had to sit through 2 hours of everything that's wrong with Phil, and we were waiting for, well, shouldn't we talk at least as much about what's right about Phil? And so really, you know, if you were to attend, and this is common to, you know, there's many person-centered organizations in this room that we're doing exactly the same thing, but if you were to attend one of our annual meetings, for example, where we're with the person and usually their family, and we're reviewing how things are going, you know, it's really focused on opportunities, things the person's learned, what's something you haven't done yet, or let's look back at last year and you're thinking about this, how did that go? Did we get there, why not? And just really focused on people's gifts, abilities, talents, and how can we focus on those instead of just exclusively, everything that's, a medicalized approach, what's wrong with the person, and then this dictates what their life's going to be. We kind of ignore that, and not just in housing, but if I look at, it's not too much in the video, but like in employment, for example, we don't really do anything that would be called a job assessment, which was a really popular thing and probably still is in a lot of places. We don't do the whole, like, let's give them a test and see. It's like, really, what is this person like? What do we know about their interests and experiences? And what is an employment environment that seems a good match? And let's see if we can find that environment and put the two people together. I mean, we have a video about a young man named Jeremy who came to us, and he was like literally told, you can never work. And we're like, okay, I'm sorry that happened to you, but our approach really just is tell us about yourself and let's find out why. And the barriers he was experiencing was having to do, he's quite boisterous. I don't think necessarily someone that can control when he swears or not. Guess what? There's workplaces where that's no problem. So that's, yes.
Hi, my name is Bob Boston. I'm from Belford. Today I'd like to know about how you got a job and how you got working. Go ahead. Marty, hi. Yes, sir.
Who'd you like to go first?
Give me.
And it's how he got his job? Yeah, perfect. Chris, tell us. Yes, bring Chris out. I love it.
So how did I get my job?
Yeah.
Well,
hold it up nice and close.
This close? Okay. Well, basically, I was a summer student previously with LiveWorkPlay, and learning from LiveWorkPlay was a great opportunity. And then,
is it turned on?
I believe so.
Okay, yeah. Put it right in your booth.
Right here?
Okay. Yeah, perfect.
Okay. And I don't know, I think it's just part of being strong in the community, being part of it. So, for example, like, if it didn't work out getting hired by LiveWorkPlay, I would have followed suit with volunteering with them and finding a way, kind of the back door through an agency, I guess, in a way. And hoping for the best. But I think ultimately they match personalities with the members, so they said, okay, we have these members that like joking, I like joking, so. Since
the microphone has drifted, I'll just say that, so Chris was with Algonquin College in the Development Service Worker program, which is not traditionally where we recruit, because we find a lot of DSW training is not meant for what we do. But we're lucky enough to know one of his professors who knew us well and said, I know about DSW, but there's this guy, Chris. I'm telling you, he's got a real gift for hearing people, and I think he'd be really a good fit. So as he said, opportunity to bring Chris on board for the summer, and and she was right. And then luckily also this funding coalesced, and we were able to hire him. But I think your story, it's unique in that one way, but it's pretty common in others, which is we're really looking for people to demonstrate they can hear and see people and have a gift for helping them, but also, as Julia had mentioned a lot, helping others see the gift in them. Yes, Ryan.
Hi, I was wondering if Chris could explain the difference between his job as community connector, and so there's another role or another title in there as well, is there? Yeah. And what is that? What is the difference of that than a community support person?
So a community connector, like, I would say that I connect the member to the community. So for example, that might be sports clubs or what they're interested in. So for example, Phil really likes going around in the neighborhood saying hello to everybody. So I might say, hey Phil, like this neighbor, he's a really good guy, maybe connect with him and see common interests. So a really good example of this, Phil was having trouble going to work on time. So I realized a connection between a neighbor and himself, and I said, Phil, is it okay if I share with your neighbor that you work on Sundays? So instead of me saying, hey, Phil, I have to call you every Sunday and remind you to go to work, I have a natural support there for Phil to say, hey, can you just remind Phil that he's working this Sunday?
Brilliant.
Thank you.
And the part of his title, so the question was about the two titles. Yeah. So he's a community connector and life coach. And we would just like to think of more the stuff that Chris is doing in Phil's home with him that he's asked for help with. That's kind of more like the life coaching piece. And then the community connecting is like the outward facing, helping him join a club or something in the community that he enjoys. You first.
I think all the people in the video talked about wanting to live independently. Do you have any that want to live with another family or with a roommate, either with an intellectual disability or without? And then my second question is the funding for the person. Do they use their passport
Okay.
Yes, definitely we support. The question was, okay, let me see if I get this. So the people in the video, most were all identifying as living on their own in the apartments with no roommates. And have we encountered people who are interested in living with family members or other family that aren't theirs, or a roommate with or without a disability? And then the second part of the question was around funding. Are people, is it ministry funded versus fee for service or using Passport? So yes, we support about a little over, outside of employment supports, we support about 100 adults, and there are a portion that are living with family. There's a few people that are choosing to live with other people. In similar, I would say, in a roommate situation without people with disabilities, we support two twin brothers that decided they wanted to live together. We have 2 individuals with disabilities that chose to live together as roommates. So I would say definitely it just depends on the individual. I would say earlier on in our journey, we did get into the affordable housing business, where we worked with the affordable Ottawa program, the federal and provincial government, and owned 7 condominium units, and 4 of them were 2 bedrooms and 3 of them were 1 bedrooms. And so the roommate situation, we had a couple of different, a roommate living with a person without a disability and a roommate with, and yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to very individual choices. And the 2-bedroom units were, I would say, overall, I would say, as people got more going on in their life, as the years passed, there was a preference for eventually having their own space and not sharing. In the beginning, I think there was families certainly had a sense of security and that their son or daughter would have company. It's less scary, less lonely, maybe, the perception. But then it seemed for most people, as they became more established in their life, that changed over time and ended up people transitioning to having their own space and not sharing. But I think it's really individual.
I think Mark McLean boycotted our session. But if she was here, I know that she's someone that taught us a long time ago with regard to those kind of questions. What's the motivation of putting people together, and whose problem are we trying to solve? And I think, understandably, a lot of times it's this idea that if we'll just put the people physically together, then they won't be lonely. And so I think we've really challenged ourselves as an organization. What are other ways of approaching loneliness? So what goes on with other people who don't have disabilities? Usually it's not automatically suggested, we'll just put some people together to defeat loneliness and isolation. So maybe it means we're not doing a very good job on connecting people and developing relationships in their lives. So now, when you hear, it wasn't scripted, so people chose to say independent. And I think a lot of what everyone in the video is talking about is really autonomy. So, I mean, Allie's not independent. She relies, like all of us, she relies on other people for various things. But she means, I'm in charge of who's in my place and when, and who opens the door and when I don't. And that's really what I think all of them are talking about, what my support is. I mean, Tim seems like a real sweetheart, but if you're early, and you're not getting in. I'm watching my show, come back at the agreed upon time, and yes, I know it's freezing rain, but that's, this is when my show. And that's perfectly, that's great. It's much better than the person feeling that, oh, the authority figure's here, I'll let them in and ruin my day. We're really glad when someone's, and that's also demonstrating his safety and concerns about him that he is able to speak out like that. I saw another.
The second part of the question was around funding, and the individuals that were showed in the videos, there's some people that definitely are supported through semi-independent living funding code through the ministry. There are the people that are living at the Multi-Faith Housing Initiative were part of our Housing Task Force 2-year project. And so thankfully, there's a combination of folks that were in that project that had passport dollars or now do have passport dollars, as well as annualized dollars that were committed to the ongoing support of people that took the risk to be part of that project. And then other people that weren't featured in the videos, definitely, actually Phil's an example. He's uses Passport on a fee-for-service basis, but we support other people that definitely use their Passport money to help be part of the solution. We recognize that you need to kind of piece things together sometimes.
Just back to your first question there, we had a situation where 2 individuals, one lived in the main floor of the home and one lived in an apartment upstairs. The gentleman upstairs needed a hip replacement due to some physical issues, and so we renovated the downstairs as a temporary location. Now, they had typically shared some meals together and watched TV or played video games together. When the recovery was finished and Rick was going to move back upstairs, they decided that they wanted that situation to stay the same. At the same time, and we're not sure if it was because of the medical crisis or not, but Rick had developed some dementia, and so then we put a monitor in the upstairs apartment, and now Rick and Frank share a 2-bedroom apartment on the main floor. So sometimes things can happen and they're not planned, they just throw together and they make sense.
Well, my point is not everyone wants to
Yeah,
live alone.
yeah,
No,
for sure.
Some
Yeah.
people want people-oriented,
Yeah, yeah.
not the fear
Yeah.
of the parent.
Yeah.
It's just
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think the other piece too is that just because you're living alone doesn't mean you can't have your friends over or your family over 3 nights a week, 5 nights a week, every night of the week if that's what you want. Depends maybe on your life
And we don't prescribe for anyone that they not have a roommate. It's absolutely,
Yeah.
it's just
It's
we have
just
noticed
choice.
there's a tendency over time that people don't want one.
Yep.
If I can just, when you talked about the partnership, the affordable housing
Mhm.
earlier on, I'm just curious as to why that didn't work. Can you slow or shortly?
Yeah, really shortly. We just found ourselves being the landlord and providing support to people. We found ourselves in a conflict of interest, and we really, the mission of the organization is to provide support and not be a landlord. So we just wanted to develop clarity about what our role was. So we ended up working with a number of families and worked with the funder for them to affordably purchase the units. So it was a win-win for everybody, but that was really the crux of why we got out of that role.
Also why we have a rural urban, because in Ottawa, we started realizing, well, the idea that there isn't housing, like I can see it, there's lots. And so the access to affordable housing in a rural circumstance, if you guys weren't intervening, it's not likely happening. And so for us, it was just identifying there are places like the multi-faith housing community, Centertown Citizens, where Phil lives. They do this. This is what they're good at. This they do nonprofit housing. We do support. Let's divide and conquer rather than getting into something. We're not good at toilet fixing, and we don't really want to. So that's where we went with that. Yes.
In respect to capacity, are you at capacity? Because you said you had staff of 25.
Right.
So are you at capacity? Are you looking to grow? Are you have a long wait list of people that would like your support?
So do you live close to Ottawa? Because it sounds like a board member. The question was about capacity and having a relatively small staff. Julie might be able to answer it as well. But we are carefully growing, and I think we're very sensitive to not outstripping our capacity, because then it just lets people down. And so at the same time as there is a lot of demand for what we're doing, we also are very cautious that we not promise or develop expectations that can't be met, because that hurts even more than waiting. And so just making sure. So we have grown. I mean, it seems like a long, long time ago, but we were like 4 people like 10 years ago. So it is a lot of growth, even though it's only at 25. Yeah. Any other questions?
Capacity for us would basically be through the DSO or transitional age youth or individuals, young people that have complex special needs that they've asked. And so then you have to kind of temper that with, again, availability of staff. We are challenged. We have about 120 staff, but we are challenged to get DSWs and people that are willing to work. So, but that's not just us. That's community care access, long-term care. Most places are so like. Yes.
So with the DSO, so with your monitoring program, with the
Yep.
detail code, would that be, or who, if they have those boxes that they check and do the access and what where people fit, and that's inside of that box, so where do people usually come from on the waiting list for that program?
So the question is about DSO and where the monitoring model fits in as far as the detail code. The short answer is there isn't really a detail code. It should be in Supported Independent Living Enhanced or Enhanced SIL, but there's no detail code for that. It doesn't really belong in intensive support because that talks about 24-hour staffing. Our monitors aren't staff. They don't attend staff meetings. That's on purpose so that if they have an issue, they talk to the team coordinator and we can bring it up to our staff, but they're not looked upon as staff. They're looked at as a friendly neighbor or part of the person's extra support system that's not paid in their lives. So if there's a vacancy. Yeah. Yeah, so we recently had an individual that passed away. We reported it to DSO. And so then they matched it up with someone that was willing to be in a situation where there wasn't staff overnight. If they say, well, I require 24-hour staffing, then that's not a fit for us. If the person said, yeah, I'll try this monitoring thing, it sounds kind of neat, or maybe my son and daughter. You know, for the most part, when we have all of our homes, we have very few problems overnight. And the model's just not something that was introduced in the last 6 months. It's got 25 years of history. And people, when they're in their own space and can get up and use the washroom at 2 o'clock or have a midnight snack or whatever because it is their place, it's amazing how well they do. And if they want to go to bed at midnight or have supper at 4 in the afternoon rather than 6, they just do it the same way that we would do that. We had an individual a number of years ago that got up in the middle of the night, heard some plates clanging. The monitor kind of peeked in. And he was taking all of his dishes out and setting them on the counter in equal. He had Fragile X, he experienced Fragile X, and so he was sorting out his plates. The monitor made a really good decision and basically said, it's his plates, he's not doing anything with them. If I hear some crashing, I'm going to interfere, I'll intervene. So she got up the next morning, this was about 2 in the morning. At 6 in the morning she went down, he wasn't in his bed. He was in his lazy boy and fell asleep in the living room after he had taken all the plates out. We don't know why. We don't know why he took all the plates out of his cupboard. The monitor came the next morning, saw him. He wasn't in his bed. He was sleeping in his lazy boy. She said, "Oh, you were up during the night. Let's put these dishes in the dishwasher, run them through, and put them back in the cupboard." And he never did that later than that. Like, we don't know why he did that, but they were his plates. And so one of the visiting agencies said, wow, like if that was happened in one of our homes, he'd be redirected to bed. He wouldn't be allowed to sleep in the lazy boy. He would be admonished for touching all the plates. And, you know, like we sometimes overcomplicate things that don't need to be overcomplicated.
There'd be a sticker program too, probably.
Yeah. So, and you know, we don't pretend to know what went on in his mind about with the Fragile X. We do know he sorts things on his table. And you don't touch those things. So he's not a person that would do well, I think, with 3 other people because he has his coloring pages, his flyers, his catalog pages, his wish book, all those things. But if someone else that he was living with touched it or his staff, he's probably going to be aggressive. So you don't touch that. That's one of the things we do when we shadow staff. You say, okay, Brian's papers, off limits. Don't touch them, don't sort them, don't try to put them in straight piles. He's done it for some reason, we don't know why. But it's his place, not your place. You just work here.
But did you unbundle your group? Did you have group home funding and you unbundled it to create this program?
Yes, yeah. So there was 3 or 4 people, Kim, 3 or 4 group homes. We basically asked people, where do you want to live? Who do you want to live with? And for the most part, people said they wanted to live in their own place. A number of years ago, I was involved with a study through the Center of Health Promotion at University of Toronto. They reviewed people after they came out of a facility. They asked them like 200 questions about what their life was like after they left an institution. And if you had to boil it down to just one question, the one question that had the highest correlation to quality of life was, do you have a key for your front door? Well, if I asked all you in here, do you have a key for your front door? You'd say, well, sure. But people we support are not always given that privilege or that responsibility. Because you know, when you live with 3 or 4 other people, you leave in the morning, staff locks the door behind you. Chances are when you come home from activities or whatever, someone's already there either making supper or doing a load of laundry. And I'm not dissing anybody, any program, but they are not allowed to kind of have a key for their front door. If you told one of us we couldn't have a key to our front door, like there'd be a little bit of reaction.
Thank you so much, Maurice, for this information. Keenan, it was very nice hearing about this individualized support for people
with the least intrusion possible to allow them to be themselves, to promote what they call a good life. It's very, very interesting. James?
We hope you take the time to make decisions to the donations to the charity of your choice on behalf of Community of Ontario. Thank you.
Thank you.
And as a token of our appreciation, please accept this gift.
Great,
Thank you very much, people. We have a short break before the next session.